Hey everyone, and welcome back. Hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to ring that bell so you don't miss out on future deep dives.
Yeah.
We're diving into a topic today that's relevant whether you're studying for the UPSC exams or just curious about how the world of money really works.
Hmm?
Black money in India.
Yeah, it's a phrase we hear all the time, but not many people really understand what it means. It goes way beyond just shady characters with suitcases full of cash. It's a whole hidden
What's that
system
system?
that impacts everything from infrastructure to even national security.
It's kind of like we're uncovering a whole secret shadow economy running right alongside the one we see every day.
Mhm.
So we'll be exploring what it is, how it works, and why it matters to every single one of us, whether we're prepping for exams or just trying to make sense of India.
And the interesting thing is that even economists can't seem to agree on one single definition for it. It's not as simple as saying it's just illegal money, although that's part of it, for sure.
Yeah.
It's more about the money, whether it was earned legally or illegally, that's hidden away from the government, specifically from taxes.
So it's like a secret stash of cash that distorts the whole financial picture. And speaking of distorted, have you seen some of the estimates for how much black money India is dealing with? There's this figure floating around that's just mind-blowing. $1.4 trillion stashed in Swiss banks alone. Now, the Swiss government says that's not true. They say the real number is closer to $2 billion. But even that difference tells us something important. Black money is really hard to pin down. By its very nature, it's elusive. Even measuring it is a challenge.
It's like trying to measure a shadow. But even if we look at the lower estimates, we're still talking about massive amounts of money. And it's not even just about the money itself, right? It's about that parallel economy you mentioned. Can you paint us a picture of what that looks like?
Imagine a whole system with its own set of rules, its own winners and losers. But it exists like a ghost alongside the official economy. We're talking political influence being bought and sold with untaxed money, businesses making deals under the table, even whole industries operating in the shadows. So it's not just a financial issue, it's actually woven into how things get done in India, which leads to the question, where does all this black money come from? It can't just be a few bad apples,
I
right?
know, it's way more diverse than that. You have your classic sources, of course, like smuggling, all those illegal goods flowing across borders and the money that generates. Then there's corruption, siphoning off funds from public projects into the pockets of a dishonest few.
Those are the ones we always hear about in the news. But I'm curious about the less obvious sources.
Mhm.
Are everyday people contributing to this without even realizing it?
It happens more than you think. Take something as simple as paying a contractor in cash to avoid taxes on home renovations. That's feeding into the black money cycle.
Yeah.
And then there's tax evasion, which is a whole other beast.
Hold on, isn't that just smart accounting?
Yeah.
Everyone tries to pay as little in taxes as possible, right?
There's a big difference between tax avoidance, which is using legal loopholes to lower your tax burden, and tax evasion, which is outright illegal, hiding income, avoiding expenses. That's what fuels the black economy.
So even seemingly ordinary transactions can have these big ripple effects. But let's get back to those industries you mentioned, the ones thriving in the shadows. Which sectors are most vulnerable to this?
Real estate is a prime example. Think about the huge sums of money involved in property deals. And with high stamp duties, it makes sense for both buyers and sellers to underreport the real price, paying a big chunk in cash under the table.
And what about gold? I've heard that plays a big role too.
Absolutely. India loves gold, but high import duties make smuggling extremely profitable. It's easy to transport, it holds its value, and it's the perfect way to hide wealth without leaving a paper trail.
So we've got real estate, we've got gold. What else is there?
Don't forget about shell companies. Those are basically businesses that exist only on paper with no real activity. They're perfect for laundering money or hiding profits. Even NGOs, which are supposed to be for good causes, can be misused to channel black money.
It's a little alarming how many ways there are to do this.
Yeah,
Does India's preference for cash transactions make this even easier?
no doubt about it. A cash-heavy economy makes it so much harder to keep track of transactions. And then you have complex systems like Hawala.
Hawala. That sounds like something out of a spy movie. What is that?
It's actually an ancient system that uses a network of brokers to settle debts across borders based on trust and informal records. No physical money actually crosses any borders, making it almost impossible to trace.
So a businessman in Delhi could send money to Dubai without leaving a trace just by relying on this network of trust.
Exactly. And then you have things like P-notes, which are participatory notes. These allow foreign investors to buy into the Indian market anonymously. They can be legitimate sometimes, but they're easily misused to hide where the money is actually coming from.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Each layer is more complex than the last. We've gone from simple cash deals to these shadowy global networks. But at the end of the day, this isn't just some abstract financial problem, is it? This hidden wealth has real consequences.
That's where things get really worrying. And that's what we'll explore next. The domino effect of black money on Indian society. From eroding public services to actually fueling crime, the impact is far-reaching.
Welcome back to our deep dive into black money in India. We've unraveled the complex ways it's generated. But now comes the unsettling part, understanding its real impact.
Yeah, that's what I'm really curious about. How does this shadow economy actually affect people's lives? Like a student in Patna or a farmer in Punjab?
Well, let's start with the most basic function of any government, providing public services. When a big chunk of income is hidden from taxes, it's like starving the system. Less tax revenue means less funding for essential things: schools, hospitals, roads, all the things that make people's lives better.
So that pothole-filled road that makes your daily commute a nightmare, or the overcrowded classroom where your kids are trying to learn black money could actually be a factor there. It's a direct link. And think about those students preparing for the UPSC exams. A government weakened by tax evasion can't invest as much in quality education research institutions, even the administrative systems that keep the country running.
It's like a hidden tax on everyone's dreams, holding back progress in all these subtle ways. But it's not just about funding right. There's the whole issue of corruption that we can't ignore.
Absolutely. Corruption is both a cause and a consequence of black money. It creates a system where decisions are made based on bribes, not on merit or what's good for the public. And those bribes often come from those untaxed funds we've been talking about.
So let's say a contractor underreports their income to avoid taxes. Then they use that black money to bribe their way into getting a government contract.
Yeah.
It becomes a vicious cycle.
And the result? Substandard infrastructure bridges built with cheap materials, safety regulations ignored, projects that stall because the funds have been siphoned off. It's a recipe for disaster. Literally.
And it erodes public trust. When people see this happening, they get cynical. Why bother paying your taxes if those in power aren't playing by the rules?
That's the insidious thing about black money. It undermines faith in institutions. It makes it harder to solve any problem, whether it's poverty or environmental damage. It creates this sense that the system is rigged against you.
We've talked about how it affects the government and public services, but what about the economy as a whole? Does black money impact things like inflation or economic growth?
Imagine trying to steer a ship when you don't know how much cargo is actually on board. That's what it's like trying to manage an economy with a huge parallel system operating in the shadows. The Reserve Bank of India, which controls things like interest rates and currency stability, is basically working with incomplete information.
So it makes it harder for the RBI to keep inflation under control.
Yeah.
And we all know that inflation hurts everyday people the most. Prices go up. Savings lose their value. It leads to economic instability.
And businesses suffer too. Legitimate companies find it hard to compete with those operating under the table, dodging taxes and regulations. It creates an uneven playing field and discourages investment.
So we've got potholes, crumbling schools, and now a struggling economy. This impact is far more widespread than I initially thought. It's like a hidden weight dragging down the entire system. And what about the social impact? Does black money worsen inequality in India?
Absolutely. Black money tends to be concentrated in the hands of the wealthy. Those who can afford to set up shell companies, invest in tax havens, or simply bribe their way out of trouble. It creates a vicious cycle where the rich get richer, widening the gap between them and everyone else.
It's the opposite of a level playing field. It's like giving the already advantaged a head start while everyone else is stuck behind. And all of this leads to social unrest crime. It's a recipe for instability.
You're hitting on a crucial point. Black money doesn't exist in isolation. It fuels other problems. Think about organized crime smuggling, drug trafficking, even terrorism. These networks thrive on untraceable funds, and black money provides that fuel.
So it's not just about economic inequality. It's about funding activities that threaten the security of the country.
Exactly. Black money has the potential to destabilize India both from within and from outside. It's like a cancer that slowly eats away at the very fabric of society.
This has been a pretty sobering conversation so far, but we can't end on such a bleak note, right? What's being done to fight this? Is there any hope of turning things around?
There's always hope. India recognizes how serious this problem is and has taken significant steps to fight back. From tightening tax laws to empowering institutions like the Enforcement Directorate, there's a multi-pronged approach in play. And that's what we'll explore next. The measures being taken to bring black money out of the shadows and into the light.
So we've explored the dark side of black money, its origins, and its widespread consequences. But now let's switch gears and talk solutions. What is India doing to combat this threat? Is there any light at the end of this tunnel?
There is hope. The good news is India's been actively fighting back. There's no single solution, of course. It's more of a multi-pronged strategy that involves legal reforms, stronger institutions, and a push for greater transparency.
Okay, break that down for us. What kind of legal changes are we talking about? Because it seems like those dealing in black money are always finding new loopholes faster than we can close them.
That's true. It is a challenge, but it's one that India is taking seriously. For instance, there's the Benami Transactions Act, which targets people who hide assets under fake names. And then there's the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, which makes it much harder to clean dirty money and bring it back into the legitimate system.
So it's about making the risks outweigh the potential rewards, increasing the chances of getting caught and facing consequences. But laws are only as effective as the people enforcing them. What about those agencies that are tasked with actually going after black money?
That's where institutions like the Enforcement Directorate come in. They've been given more power and more resources to investigate these complex financial crimes, track down assets, and bring the people responsible to justice. Then there's the Financial Intelligence Unit, which analyzes data to find suspicious patterns that might indicate money laundering or tax evasion.
Wow, it sounds like detective work on a massive scale, sifting through transactions following the money trail. But India's a huge country, and so much of this happens offline under the radar. How can we even begin to tackle that?
Well, that's where technology is crucial. Advanced data analytics and even artificial intelligence are being used to find anomalies, to flag potential red flags that human investigators can then follow up on. And as we move towards a more digital economy, those digital footprints become even more valuable.
So every time we use our debit card or pay for something online, we're actually helping in the fight against black money. That's a fascinating thought. But there's always that tension between security and privacy. How do we make sure this push for transparency doesn't infringe on individual rights?
It's a valid concern, and it's one that policymakers are very aware of. Finding that balance is really important. But there are also proactive measures to encourage people to do the right thing. Voluntary disclosure schemes, for example, give people a chance to come clean, pay penalties, and avoid harsher punishments down the line.
It's like offering a way out a reset button, but with consequences. And speaking of bold moves, we can't forget demonetization. That was a major shock to the system, and it was designed to flush out black money. Did it actually work?
Well, the jury's still out on that one.
Yeah.
It definitely pushed India towards digital transactions, but how much it actually impacted black money holdings is debatable. Some experts say it mainly hurt those who rely on cash, while the truly wealthy found ways to adapt.
It shows us there are no easy answers. What about international cooperation? Black money doesn't respect borders, right? We all know about those infamous tax havens.
Exactly. India's been working with other countries to share information and track down tax evaders hiding assets overseas. They're also putting pressure on those tax havens to be more transparent. And there are agreements in place to prevent double taxation, closing loopholes that were often exploited in the past.
So it's a global game of cat and mouse, but at least India's not playing it alone. But beyond just laws and enforcement, shouldn't we be addressing the root causes of this problem, like the influence of black money in elections?
Absolutely. That's a crucial piece of the puzzle. We need electoral reforms, stricter campaign finance rules, greater transparency in political funding. We could even explore completely different models to reduce the influence of money on politics. Because as long as elections are being fueled by black money, it's going to be that much harder to clean up the system.
You're right. It's like trying to fix a leaky roof when the foundation is crumbling beneath it. But this conversation has given me some hope. It's a complex and ongoing battle, but at least India is taking it seriously.
And remember, each one of us has a role to play. We need to be aware of how our own financial decisions might be feeding the problem, and we need to demand accountability from our leaders. These are small steps, but they can make a difference.
Well said. That's a powerful message to leave our listeners with. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into black money in India. We hope you've learned something new about its dimensions, its impact, and the efforts being made to fight it. Knowledge is power, and the more we understand challenges like this, the better equipped we are to be part of the solution.